sure all of us are familiar with the old saying that some people are born to greatness and some people have it thrust upon them. I have to say, in the context of my life, some people are born to greatness and some people end up sitting next to it. There's been two incidents of that in my life, and one of those pertains to our guest today, Steve Benson. First time, when I began my college career, I studied at a small college of liberal arts and sciences in Oregon. And that was in 1972. And one of my classmates that year was a fellow by the name of Stephen Jobs. That was at Reed College. Both of us dropped out of Reed College in 1972. I went on a mission and then came to BYU. Stephen Jobs went down to California and with Ted Wozniak founded Apple Computer in a garage and became a multi-millionaire. I came back to BYU and I was studying international relations and political science. I sat down one day, and who was sitting next to me but this fellow who was making drawings all over everything, and it was Steve Benson. It was an exciting time to be at BYU in those days when Steve was here. I say in those days, it wasn't that long ago. Steve was a 1979 graduate of Brigham Young University in political science. But it was a fun time because we had very talented people on our editorial page in the Daily Universe. Dallas Burnett, who at that time was the editor of the Daily Universe, had taken somewhat of a chance when he had two political cartoonists that he could choose from for the editorial page. He decided that he would not choose between the two, but he would use both of them. And one of them was Steve Benson, the other one was Pat Bagley, and both had gone on to pursue very, very successful careers. Steve has been extremely successful in his endeavors. On the way down, we were talking about some of his experiences, and he said that 1984 was probably the banner year for him. And of course, in his typical way of saying things, everything has been downhill since. But that's not really true. Let me just mention what happened in 1984 for Steve. In that year, he was named the Brigham Young University Distinguished Young Alumnus. He also received the National Headliner Award for political cartooning, and he was a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize in political cartooning. But of all my favorite stories about Steve Benson, the one that I remember the most is one day he and I were involved in a game. It was one of these games of strategy and negotiation. It was a board game called Machiavelli. And I remember quite well convincing Steve that he should lend me the money, but I didn't tell him what I was going to do with that money. I borrowed money from Steve so I could pay someone else to murder Steve. So I like to think that Steve, in all of his experiences in the rough and tumble world of politics, got his first lessons right here at BYU. We're very pleased to welcome today Steve Benson.
I remember that incident well. I was assassinated, all my provinces went into revolt, and I believe you lost the game anyway, but it's good to be here at BYU. You know, down in Arizona, where the heat's been on recently, there's all kinds of jabs that people take, in good-natured fun, of course, at graduates of Brigham Young University, one of them being I'm introduced frequently as having graduated from Brigham Young University. Now, I'm not sure if that's true, but you've heard it before. But it's good to be here, back in my old stomping grounds and talking with you about the wonderful world of editorial cartooning. If you have any questions during the time that we show the cartoons and talk about some of the issues, great. If you have any answers, that's even better, because we could use a few. But editorial cartooning has a long and glorious history in this country as well as in Europe. We won't go through all the details, but I thought I'd show you some of the some cartoons that kind of set the stage for the profession as it is, and where we've come since then. You may remember, well, Dallas Burnett, back in March of 1770, I believe you were a freshman if you want. But we had, of course, in Boston, Massachusetts, we had the Sons of Liberty had gathered on the Boston Commons to protest a certain event that was happening there in Boston. That, of course, as we know, was the quartering of British troops on the Boston Commons in opposition to the will of the British subjects who happened to be occupying the colonies at the time. Well, what happened was a group of colonists got there, started badgering a sentry who was by himself, and called in for some reinforcements from the 29th Regiment of the Royal British Army. About 10 o'clock at night, things got a little bit rougher. They started throwing some stones. One rock hit the musket of one of the British soldiers, and before anybody could control the situation, shots were fired, and the British troops fired into the whole group. By the next morning, as you know in your history books, everybody in Boston by 10 o'clock in the morning knew that there had been an incident the night before. There had been a massacre on King Street. British soldiers had killed British subjects, and it, of course, spread like wildfire. The colonists knew that something had happened. The universe had shifted. Things weren't the same. And the real shots that began the American Revolution started, I think, on the Boston Common back in 1770. Well, at that time, a vivid cartoon was engraved by a young artist. His name was Henry Pelham. Now, back in those days, we didn't whip him out in 5 minutes. He had to engrave it on copper. It took him several days. We didn't have the daily deadlines that we have here at the Day of the Universe, which I always missed anyway. But he worked on it, got it put together, and spread it around to some of his friends. Paul Revere happened to hear about the cartoon, and Paul Revere, being the fervent patriot that he was, said, this would be a great vehicle that we could use to embolden the colonists and get them to rise up against British occupation. So Paul Revere plagiarized the cartoon and got it out on the streets before Henry Pelham could get it out. Henry Pelham wrote a nasty letter to Paul Revere, told him he didn't appreciate that, but nonetheless, it was one of the greatest cartoons ever manufactured during the Revolutionary War, and in fact was sent back to Britain as an example of one of the causes of the Civil War, as the British called it, against the colonists. Well, what Paul Revere did, and we'll show you, not only did, he not only plagiarized that cartoon, he sent out another one of his own. Now you can understand why. Paul wasn't a great cartoonist. We got the basic idea across. This cartoon was engraved woodcut by Paul, and showed the coffins of 4 out of the 5 colonists that were killed. During the Revolutionary War period, some of the greatest cartoonists that ever lived were busily sketching away. I heard of a guy named Gilray. He was a British cartoonist, and here it shows him drawing the American colonists as a rattlesnake surrounding Saratoga and Yorktown. So you can never really tell where these cartoons were coming from. They always kept their feelings to themselves. But one of the most famous cartoons ever produced during the Revolutionary War was drawn by a guy who invented bifocals, flew kites who got electrocuted, signed the Paris Peace Treaty of 1789, and is never mentioned prominently in the history books as being as doing the thing that he was most known for, and that was editorial cartooning. Who, of course, are we talking about? Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin did this cartoon, in his response to international relations. It's been said that war is just an extension of diplomacy by other means. Well, this was war for the colonies. This cartoon was actually drawn in 1754 during the French and Indian War, represented each part of each colony, and then was used again during the Revolutionary War in 1776 because it was so popular. There was a common superstition at the time that if you cut up a snake into several parts, it could nonetheless rejoin itself again and live. And Ben Franklin later in the Constitutional Convention made a wry remark to his colleagues, either we hang together or we hang separately. So this cartoon was used as a rallying cry for the colonists during the Revolutionary War. And of course, things that, as Miles has said, have gone only uphill since then. In 1986, Bert Breathitt won the Pulitzer Prize for Boone County. How many of you read Boone County? It's a great street. There was a great controversy that erupted in the political cartooning field that somehow the purpose of cartooning had been demeaned by giving the Pulitzer Prize to a comic strip artist. But nonetheless, Ben had to move aside, and you got to move with the time. But one of the greatest editorial cartoons ever to come across the American scene was a fellow who wasn't born in America. He was born in Bavaria, came to the United States when he was 6 years old in 1846, and he drew cartoons like this. Any of you familiar with this guy's work? Tom Nast. Thomas Nast. Now, a lot of people know Thomas Nast for a lot of different things. The thing he's most famous for, of course, is his relentless criticism of food. Boss Tweed of the corrupt Tammany Hall, or Tweed was back in New York City. Boss Tweed stole millions of dollars to various schemes from the taxpayers in New York. And Tom Nast would draw him in various, stages of distress. What are you laughing at, says Boss Tweed, to the victor belong the spoil? Well, this was just insulting to Boss Tweed. I mean, he couldn't stand this kind of stuff. Probably one of the most famous cartoons ever done on Boss Tweed by Tom Nast was this one right here. So it kind of capsulized it all in 7 seconds or less. Well, Boss Tweed was so incensed by what Tom Nast had done, he called him into his office in 1871. He says, look, Tom, I really appreciate your talents. I'll give you $500,000 if you'll study abroad. But, of course, Boss Tweed was not to be rewarded with his wish. And Tom Nast continued to do cartoons on it. And eventually, Boss Tweed was run out of office because of the cartoons that Thomas Nast had done. Thomas Nast was relentlessly criticizing him. He was eventually convicted of embezzlement and various other crimes, and was sent to jail. Well, the trouble with sending Boss Tweed to jail was that they didn't really put him in jail. He was able to drive around town. He used a bailiff as his butler at night. He'd go home and eat at night. He would have a chauffeur from the jail, a jailer that would drive him around during the day. And he escaped from his home one night and went to Spain or Cuba. They weren't sure exactly where he was. Well, come to find out, justice prevailed in the end. Because what happened was, well, I'll show you right here. If I can find it. A Spanish policeman in Vigo, Spain, recognized Boss Tweed from a cartoon that Thomas Nast had done. This was the cartoon. This is Boss Tweed. This is the cartoon. The word got back that Boss Tweed had been seen kidnapping 2 kids in Spain. They knew this wasn't true because of all of his sins, which were many, he was never known for being kidnapped. But nonetheless, this was the explanation for the story. He was brought back to the United States, convicted, and died a pauper in a New York State jail. So there's an example of the power of art on American politics. Tell the administration that we're watching. Now, Thomas Nast, of course, was known for many things, and we'll just show you a couple of them real quick. But you probably didn't realize that he is responsible for defining the visual debate in American politics. Thomas Nast invented the Republican elephant. He also came up with its counterpart. That's the first one, the first appearances of the Republican elephant. The second one here, of course, is the Democratic jackass, as they called it back then. And he also invented a couple other figures that we're all familiar with. Uncle Sam, and finally, the last one, the short here that a lot of you guys probably still believe in, living here in Happy Valley. Santa Claus, right? So, Boss Tweed was known for a lot of different things and helped kind of set the tone for political cartooning in the future. Also, who was it? It was General Grant said 2 things I'd like to do in the presidency. One was the sword of Sheridan, the other was essentially Thomas Nast. Abraham Lincoln says that Thomas Nast was his best recruiting soldier because he, more than any other civilian, won the war with the Union. So you can see the power of art on American politics. Now, as journalists, however, we take great pride in abiding by certain standards of ethics, certain moral virtues that guide our work. And the cartoonists, of course, are no exception. We have to remember that the editorial cartoons comfortably afflicted and afflicted comfortable, so to speak. And you never let the facts get in the way of what we do. Wouldn't it be a great job to have where you're able to exaggerate to your heart's content without having to worry about being sued? Or if you are sued, the paper will pay for it. So we live by this motto: do you want the truth that will set you free, or the truth that hurts? So we have a lot of fun with what we do. One of the funnest little anecdotes I like to tell happened back in 1903 with Governor Samuel J. Pennypacker, who was a governor in Pennsylvania. There was a cartoonist who kept on drawing the governor like a parrot. The governor had a big nose. And he was upset by this. He says, if you had done this 25 years ago in England, we would have cut your head off and paraded around on a pole and let people know that we don't tolerate this stuff. Well, he knew he couldn't get away with that in America, so he went to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and got a friendly legislator to introduce a bill that would make it a crime punishable by a fine and a jail term to draw any Pennsylvania official as either a bird or an animal. This bill started to make its way through the committee process when, unfortunately, the cartoonist for the Philadelphia North American paper in town heard about it. The next morning, Governor Pennypacker opened up his newspaper, and there on the front page was a full-page collection of major Pennsylvania officials drawn as vegetables. That law never made it out of committee, needless to say. But, the editorial cartoon in America is particularly American because we have, of course, what we call the Bill of Rights, part of our Constitution. It says Congress shall make no law respecting free speech. Now, aren't we glad that we live in a country where we can express our point of view? In London last year, an anti-Khomeini cartoonist, very outspoken, was gunned down, shot point blank in the head because of his criticisms of the Khomeini regime, and he died a few days later. In 1980, in Moscow, a book fair was held where books from all over the United States and the world were brought, so that the Muscovites and others who were able to make it there could see what the rest of the world was reading. 45 books from the United States were banned. Out of those 45 books, 5 of them were editorial cartoon books. So maybe things have changed with perestroika and glasnost. Maybe now Mikhail Gorbachev doesn't mind being drawn with his head balding and then the birthmark in the shape of Afghanistan. I'm sure he gets a real kick out of that. Obviously, what is it that tyrants and rascals and politicians and scoundrels fear most? Is it guns? Is it armies? No, it's ideas. And what's one of the most effective ways to get across an idea? But through the editorial cartoon. Editorial cartoons, as Don Wright of the Miami News said, are a welcome relief from the overblown elitist poopery we find on the editorial pages. I did it. It sounds like pretty well. And in about 7 seconds or less, you can cut through all the fluff and get to the stuff. Now, granted, they have a lot of exaggeration. They aren't literal interpretations of the truth, nor are they fair-minded. When have you ever seen a cartoon that says, "This is my opinion on Governor Meekum. However, on the other hand, to be fair to the other point of view, I will list the objections to the cartoon that will come in tomorrow's mail." And the editorial cartoon only expresses one point of view, one side of the story, and does so with a great deal of relish and some would say mean-spiritedness. But we're above that kind of thing. But the point of the cartoon is to express an opinion. It's a satirical device that's used to comment on public officials or public issues of the day. How many times you see a cartoon that says, "Gee, thanks, Mr. Nixon, for telling the truth today"? See, the role of a cartoon is to remind public officials that they are public officials and we are holding them accountable for their actions and for their words. And when they violate their oath of trust, that's when the watchdog press yaps at their heels, or even better, that's when the pit bull cartoonist grabs them by the neck and shakes them until they get their attention. The role of the cartoonist is to be kind of a snapshot, to remind the reader this is what's happening in a very simple way at this point in time, and to remind the public official, as Pogo said, we have met the enemy, and he is us. So that's how we do it. Now, Sugar Ray Leonard, a great philosopher in his own right, was speaking to the 1982 graduating class at Harvard University, and waxing particularly eloquent at one point in his speech. He said, we all have God-given talents. You have God-given talents. I have God-given talents. I'm thankful for my God-given talents. Mine just happens to be beating up people. That's basically what editorial cartoonists do. The Wall Street Journal said of Pat Oliphant, who's nationally syndicated, that if Pat Oliphant couldn't draw, he'd be an assassin. Perhaps that explains best what we do. A cartoonist stands up from behind the bush, scopes out the terrain, and takes a rifle shot and ducks, or braces and prepares for the whirlwind. But the role of the cartoonist, again, is to be a critic. I remember I did a cartoon down in Phoenix on cocaine abuse at one of the rather well-off high schools in Scottsdale, Arizona. I don't know how many have been in Scottsdale, but it's quite well-off. I did a cartoon showing mounds of cocaine pouring out of the school, and coke the real thing, and all these things that the kids could relate to. I got a call from the head of the pep squad saying, "Don't you know that we won the band competition in Washington, D.C. this year? Don't you know that our senior class has the greatest GPA, highest GPA of any class in the last several years?" I said, "Well, how many times do you see a cartoon that says, gee, 800 airplanes landed safely today at Salt Lake International Airport?" We look for the abuse, we look for the folly, we look for the pomposity, and then we puncture the balloon. It's what we call the laughter of apprehension. The politicians want to be in the cartoon, but they don't want to be stuck too deeply. But nonetheless, we oblige them as much as we can. And of course, they help us as much as they can too, whether they're heads of state or local politicians. I know, for instance, I go to bed at night knowing somewhere in this great land of America a politician will be defending himself. That will give me all the material I need for the next day's cartoon. I have 535 writers, 435 in the House, and 100 in the Senate. So, Draper Hill, cartoonist for the Detroit News, said this. He said, our job is to be an evangelical pain in the backside. And that's basically a summation of what we do. But he said at the same time, we need to remember that we do not have a divine right as cartoonists to take the process too far, to push too far, to libel, to maliciously defame in reckless disregard for the truth. And we try to make science fiction out of reality. We try to get as close as we can to the line without stepping over it. And in the process, there's a great heritage in America that allows for exaggeration. There was one cartoonist back in the 40s, Danford Fitzpatrick, who was thrown in jail by a judge who found him in contempt of court during a court trial in which the paper was involved. The cartoonist didn't agree with the judge's decision on a particular matter of legal import, and so he drew a cartoon on the judge. The judge threw him in jail, and it took the Missouri Supreme Court to get him out. That's the only example I know where an American cartoonist has ever been thrown in jail, but we have been sued. I have a cartoonist friend of mine, Scott Willis, in San Jose, California, who's being sued for $1 billion. B as in BYU. $1 billion for drawing a councilman in having a huge back pocket and all the politicians in town being in the back pocket. So that will be interesting. I hope the San Jose Mercury News has the resources to continue publishing after that one's finished. But the editorial cartoons are political, they're scathing, and they hurt. Now, that's too bad. But that's the way it's supposed to be. Boss Tweed saw himself as what? A bloated vulture. And his friends were depicted as degenerate boozers. What about Pat Buchanan? He's been shown in cartoons as being a poisonous viper. Or James Watt being a little dog in a puddle of his own making. Or some other ones. Governor Duke Majan has shown naked for vetoing a strip search bill in California. So these kinds of things hurt. They're painful. But they're meant to be that way. We not only draw our victims, we quarter them. And we do it with some degree of relish. Now, the argument has been, though, that cartoons cause undue emotional distress. You may have heard this argument lately at the Supreme Court level when Jerry Falwell took on Hustler magazine. Now, I want to make it clear, if Grandpa is listening, I'm not condoning Hustler magazine. Certainly not. Mr. Flint is a peddler of sleaze and filth, and everything that he says is redeemable social commentary is anything but. He did a cartoon, or a parody, a couple of years ago in which he denigrated Reverend Falwell and his lovely deceased mother. Reverend Falwell sued on two grounds. First, you have libeled me, he said. Second, you have invaded my privacy and caused me severe emotional distress. Well, the jury found against Falwell on the first count. He said, you haven't been libeled. Why do you think they said he hadn't been libeled? Because it was true? We won't go into the details of the act, but it was not true. But he was not found, Flint, to have libeled Jerry Falwell because the court ruled, or the jury ruled, no reasonable person would believe the accusations made in the cartoon were true. They were so outrageous, so bizarre, that no thinking individual, perhaps excepting those who live in Arizona, would believe that this actually was a case. In fact, so he was not libeled. He was labeled, but he wasn't libeled. All right. Second count: severe emotional distress. The jury found in favor of Reverend Falwell and stuck Larry Flint for $200,000. Reverend Falwell asked for $45 million, but he, took whatever he could get. Well, what happened was this went all the way to the Supreme Court. How did the court rule? Do you remember? They ruled in favor of the sleazebag. Can you believe that? An 8-0 decision with Chief Justice Rehnquist speaking the majority view. Now let me read just this a little bit from his opinion. He said, the caricature of respondent and his mother, published in Hustler, was gross and repugnant. This is right from the court. And at best, it was a distant cousin of political cartoons, and a rather poor relation at that. Okay, so they kind of distance themselves and lay the groundwork, but then we have the proverbial, nonetheless, being gross and repugnant, the court went on to say, is not necessarily libelous. Okay, that was one of their arguments. And producing anguish is not actionable. What if satirists, Mark Russell, or whoever, were fearful that if they produced anguish, say, in the hearts of Ed Meese, if he has one, that he would be sued. Let me give you an example. Mark Russell recently had a little ditty that he played at the piano, commenting on how Ed Meese had said there was enough food and shelter in the United States to provide everybody with ample. This is how one verse went. It was sung to Santa Claus is coming to town. He's making a list of the food that he brings to all the hungry who live in Palm Springs. Mr. Meese is coming to town. Now, Mr. Meese probably experienced severe emotional distress when he read that. Okay, but what the court said was this. The appeal of the political cartoon or caricature is often based on exploration of unfortunate physical traits or politically embarrassing events, an exploration often calculated to injure the feelings of the subject portrayed. The art of the cartoonist is often not reasoned or even-handed, but slashing and one-sided. And then they finish by saying, despite their sometimes caustic nature, from the early cartoon portraying George Washington as an ass down to the present day, graphic depictions and satirical cartoons have played a prominent role in political and public debate. From the viewpoint of history, it is clear that our political discourse would have been considerably poorer without them. So in other words, a lot of exaggeration is allowed to be played with. But in the end, if you could argue that you were severely emotionally distressed, George Washington could sue, Boss Tweed could sue, Mark Russell could sue, Jerry Falwell could sue. So what do we have the First Amendment for? To protect nice, proper speech. It's put there to protect sometimes the type of speech that we find to be personally offensive and repugnant and vile and raunchy and yucky and sleazy. But that's why the court ruled the way it did. And that's why editorial cartoonists have had a long history of being able to get away basically with visual murder. But it's like one of my colleagues at the Arizona Republic said, he says, Steve, your job, as I see it, is to march down the hill after the battle's over and shoot all the wounded. It's a nasty job, I suppose, but somebody has to do it. Art Buchwald said this, he said, how often he was offended when his work has failed to anger his targets. That is really the truth. When Governor Beacom fails to get upset at my cartoons and call into question my salvation, I am harmed. I'm personally distressed. Art Buchwald said that he was publicly humiliated and suffered grievous professional damage when President Nixon refused to put Art Buchwald on his personal enemies list. Cartoonists are going to file a class action suit against all politicians who are not offended by our work. So that's a warning to them. But what I thought we'd do now, at this point, before we conclude, is take a little literacy test. I'm sure all of you in the upper divisions of IR are probably more literate than your professors, and we're going to probably discover that right now by taking a little visual examination, and then we'll show you some of the cartoons we've done on international affairs. Who is this person? Mr. Clean. Mr. Clean was invented by, come on, all you house husbands. You're on your knees every day using this stuff. Who invented Mr. Clean? Procter & Gamble. All right. Back in 1984, Procter & Gamble ran a survey in one of its publications asking people to identify this person. Give me a percentage. How many people do you think knew who Mr. Clean was, percentage-wise? 93% knew who Mr. Clean was. The same month, October '84, People magazine ran a similar survey with a photograph of George Bush, and asked the same question. Needless to say, only 52% knew who George Bush was. So what does that tell us? Well, a logical conclusion lead us to believe that George Bush is not Mr. Clean. What editorial cartoons basically do is we provide reading material for illiterates. 2/3 of the population is illiterate, so great. What does that supposed to mean? We don't have to worry about writing. This was the hope of our former governor in Arizona, but it didn't work out. Now, for all of you, I suppose most of you are 18 and above. Can I vote, Dad? No, you're not 18. How come you and Mom didn't vote? We're not 18 either. So don't let them use that one on you. Now, the interesting thing is a survey was taken last year. 20% of 6th graders surveyed couldn't find the United States on the map. One of the students found it in Brazil, and in a freshman college course in Illinois, one of the students identified London as being in the Soviet Union. So we have our work cut out for us. There are 60 million illiterates in the United States, so there is a burgeoning audience for our work. And so we provide this type of public service. And the role of the editorial cartoon is to puncture pomposity, as I said, as Bill Malden of the Chicago Tribune said, with a big hit it. One of the biggest things is big government. All right, here we have the 1970s scandal with the CIA involving domestic spying, when they should have been spying on everyone else and assassinating everyone else and leaving the domestic stuff to the FBI. But this cartoon was done by Bob Englehart of the Hartford Current. We also like doing cartoons on big government on the local level. Here we have Daily in Washington. Come on, Harold, it's not like you're saying goodbye. We'll be back to vote. How many are from Chicago? From Chicago? Okay. Today's election day. Vote early, vote often. Down in Arizona, we had again, big government. It was a classic target for cartoonists. Open heart surgeon who transplanted what he invented. It's called the Phoenix heart. He didn't get permission from the FDA to do this. The man was dying. He had about 9 hours to live. And he said, well, either we implant the device or else he's going to die, and we don't have time to get permission from the government. So he went ahead and implanted a heart, which was a mistake. You never do that without first asking consent from the sugar daddy. So here we had... We also like taking after international businesses that have multinational bases of operation. When E.F. Hutton talks, it's on the advice of his attorney. Again, these are just gentle reminders that they're being watched by people who carry those poison pens. You guys don't hear it often enough, but you're prompt and predictable. Something America can always count on. Thanks, neither rain nor snow, nor heat, gloom, nor heat, nine, da 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 da. I'm talking about your rate hike. So the Postal Service is great stuff. I'll help all of you are mailing your Christmas cards in April, or has it already taken effect? And it's too late. All right. Here's another one by Pat Oliphant. Let the Postal Service take you for a ride. Yeah, reach out and milk someone. So the IRS is a favorite one. We're all coming up on tax time. Now, the IRS admits that 39% of the information it gives you over the phone, if you happen to be so unfortunate they have no other recourse but to call them for help, 39% of the information they give you is non-factual. They've admitted to that. That's right, ma'am. Midnight, June 15th. One of the greatest cartoons ever done was by Jeff McNally of the Chicago Tribune. Had no artwork in it at all, and as a result won the Pulitzer Prize and gives the rest of us peons hope. This one is on the income tax form. How many talking chickens do you own? Names, do any of them play the oboe? Do you live within 2 miles of a decent pizza place? Yes, no, extra cheese. Have you rotated your tires lately? Yes, no. If no, file IRS tire rotation schedule L. Yes, no, yes. Okay, let's get filing status. How are you filing? Single, double, sacrifice, fly. Married filing singly joint return. Joint married single separate spouse. Head of household filing separate but joint return. Head of joint filing single filing spouse. Payroll with separate dependent filing out of joint return single. Name of dependent children who lived with you. Why? Way more than last year's tax form. Here's a good one for you math majors. How many inches in a liter? Total confusion, add line 60 F and G, fold an H, B, and go firm. So this is a great cartoon where you go through all the details. But again, big government, if it's big, hit it. This cartoon... This one came out when Wilbur Mills was teaching Elizabeth Ray how to type during her off hours. The interesting thing about this, of course, is it relates to any political year and virtually any politician. So we have great fun. Now, what I thought I'd do is kind of concentrate on a little bit of the IR. How many of you are been studying what's going on in Central America? I'm sure you're familiar with what's going on with old Pineapple Face down in Panama. You know, that's his nickname because Noriega, because apparently he didn't use Clearasil when he was a kid. Also, the United States is trying to put the squeeze on him with the tax law, and who knows that it may work. I believe right now that the situation is that even the opponents of Noriega are saying, call off the additional sanctions. We're going to let this guy twist in the wind, and he'll squirm enough pretty soon to to cause his downfall. Now, I realize that this is not technically correct. The Panama Canal is actually much deeper than that. But again, we never let the facts get in the way of what we do. On to the Summer Games. We also like the international spirit of doing so well at the Olympics. Once in a while, we try to get serious. There are some things you really can't joke about. Baldheim, really, I can explain all this. Men are supposed to get Klaus Barbie. For your unrepentant role in deporting Jews to Nazi death camps, this court finds you guilty of crimes against humanity. Do you have any questions before sentence is passed? Just one, Your Honor. Anybody here got the phone number for the Vatican? February 20th is a Mormon university. Once in a while we get very symbolic. Pat Oliphant did this cartoon recently on the upheavals in Northern Ireland. Now, it's such a controversial, convoluted situation where you have rights and wrongs on both sides that oftentimes the cartoonist doesn't know where to go and is totally confused, so he simply illustrates the tragedy of it all. And this is sometimes a cop-out for cartoonists who can't figure out complicated issues. But this is nonetheless a very effective cartoon done by Pat. Another one done by Mike Lukovich. Welcome to Mr. O'Roger's neighborhood. Today's word is revenge. Can you say revenge? So, these cartoons just have a way of boiling it all down to the bare essence. How about Yitzhak Shamir by Jeff McNally? I'm moving as fast as I can. Just here on the West Bank. Of course, we have our forces engaged, some would say embroiled, in the Persian Gulf. Don't worry, I'll be alongside to protect you, as Uncle Sam takes a ginger step out into the deep blue. The interesting thing is, initially our allies, did they not, were somewhat reluctant to throw their weight behind us. All clear, gun it, baby. As the Bridgeton went out in one of its unaccustomed roles of searching for mines as an oil tanker. But eventually the French, the Italians, and the Brits have come online. Khomeini, of course, is a real stumbling block in the Middle East and is scaring us all into total paralysis. Operation Martyrdom as the lemmings fall off the cliff. Now, John Chancellor didn't like this cartoon and referred to it on the evening commentary as being a slur against Iranians. But we try to be equally, we try to be equal opportunity offenders and slur everyone. Now, here we have, of course, Mikhail Gorbachev, who came to town and just kind of wooed over everyone last December during the INF treaties. Well, Nancy, looks like they've attracted quite a following in the press. I was back there. It was terrific. No one could get in to the briefings because of limitations on space. So we all sat in CNN Central with our cameras trained on the television screen, and actually you saw European reporters sending back film of television sets in America. So you can rest easy at night. At night, the press is, of course, digging out every conceivable story that it can. No cheating, you two. INF Finals Week, December 7th through 9th. We have quarterly Salt 1, Salt 2, and the ADN. One of the favorite sayings for Reagan during the summit was to quote that old Russian proverb. What was, any of you speak Russian here? We all will be pretty soon if the Democrats are there. But no. As an old Russian proverb says, trust but verify. Roughly translated as P.T. Barnum said, there's a sucker born. Of course, we had the big signing ceremony, lights, camera, roll 'em. Then, of course, we get into the serious, what we call linkage between our nuclear forces and what's going on in Afghanistan, other regional conflicts around the world. Now remember, before the INF Treaty was signed, Mikhail Gorbachev really stood up Ronald Reagan at Reykjavik. Remember that? Negotiating in public, broadsiding the administration with positions that they weren't prepared to deal with. So we had this cartoon. Mikhail, I can take all the other pre-signed embarrassments, but this movie cushion is going too far. This was done by Pat Oliphant. He says it's a deal. He destroys all his medium-range missiles. He gets out of Afghanistan. He lets all the Jews go. And you give him the secrets of Teflon. One of the big issues, though, back at the summit, however, was getting back to the point that our relations must be built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. The real superpowers behind these attempts here. And then after 3 days of love feasting, that's it. We have the INF treaty roll out of the tube there. Start talks, Afghanistan, human rights, trade, and Persian Gulf still are somewhat up in the air. How many of you have been familiar or kept up to date with the recent ethnic uprisings in the Soviet Union? I can't pronounce these words. Azerbaijani and the Armenians are having some nationalistic disputes. Consider a minor clarification, Comrade Armenian. Blazniak, where apparently the Soviets are going to crack down on any Armenian nationalism that seems to be surfacing in the provinces. Then, of course, we have our Canadian-U.S. relationships, which are also always on the how was I supposed to know it was acid rain? Then, of course, we have Maggie Thatcher, the Iron Lady. I believe this is her third term now, isn't it? Has really stuck the Labour Party down the tubes. And apparently is denationalizing many of the major industries and really bringing the employment situation, inflation around. Well, Mikhail Gorbachev admitted to Tom Brokaw a startling revelation that none of us ever knew before. Well, since you asked, yes, we are dabbling in it a bit, their own version of Star Wars. And their attempt to basically ABM the whole country. The United States is keeping up with the Soviets in spaces. Then we get back into the Middle East again. While you're up, hit me up a Big Mac, a side of fries, and an American hostage. It seems that whenever they want something like new missile parts, new planes, just go out and grab a hostage. And of course, down in Beirut, if you go down the streets, you see Now, Ronald Reagan, he doesn't remember signing the finding. Remember the finding, that infamous finding where he apparently signed off on you can trade arms for hostages? I'd like to ask one question. Everybody who can remember what they were doing on August 8, 1985, raise your hand. So Reagan ultimately, of course, is responsible for what happened. And when it was finally revealed that, in fact, we were in the business of